I'm going to be responding to Nathan's claim, which was by 2026 due to CTE scrutiny, soccer player will wear helmets and protective gear. Before I begin, I will reintroduce the definitions of CTE. CTE is a traumatic encephalopathy, degenerative brain disease associated with concussions. He had two secondary points to support his main claim. The first one is soccer player has been found with symptoms of CTE after their death, and the second one is youth soccer has problem with concussions. And my response to his first secondary claim is that although he provided some example of the incidents that's already happened, he didn't cite where he got the information during his speech, and he also didn't mention some reasonings why soccer player will wear helmets in 10 years. Also, for his sporting points, he said that Brazilian soccer team player Hideraldo Luiz Bellini died at age 83 and that he suffered from CTE. And my response to that is that at age 83, people may have other kind of diseases or complications, just like Bellini. He had other kind of diseases or complications that could lead to his death, which means that the cause of his death is not necessarily due to CTE. And according to BBC News article, it stated that Bellini died at age 83 after complications from heart attack, which shows that he also has other kind of diseases that lead to his death. And also for his second secondary claim, which was youth soccer has problem with concussions, he didn't cite where he got his scoring points, and he just mentioned about protective gear and helmets will help out like boxing does and help the youth soccer player to get strong enough to be able to handle headers. And my response to that is that soccer is unique sports because of the purposeful use of the unprotected head for controlling the balls. If soccer players wear helmets, it's going to limit their mobility, therefore it will decrease their ability to feel or control the ball when they're doing the heading, and which will affect their performances. According to an article from active.com, it stated that there are common practices that can protect young soccer player, which is players should use the proper ball size for their age group. For example, number 3 for age 6 to 9, and number 4 is for age 10 to 13, and so on. Which means if we use the proper ball size, it could protect the younger player from having injury or problems with concussions. And also, according to the American Medical Society for Sport Medicines, stated that soft helmets are best suited to prevent impact injury, such as fractures, bleeding, and lacerations, but have not been shown to reduce the incidence of severity of concussions. So it means that there's not enough evidence yet that headgear are also going to help. And besides, there are those who believe that soft helmets do more harm than good. For example, according to an article by Today.com, since some younger soccer players wearing protective gear, many mothers notice their child tend to be more aggressive in the games compared to when they don't wear it. On the other hand, when they don't wear any protective gear or helmets, they are more careful with their movement. And also, my opponent mentions about how it's going to take 10 years for that to come true, since it's what the NFL timeline was. And my response to that is there are key difference between soccer and football. NFL is a full body contact sport, which it's important for them to wear helmets. Besides, injury or concussion in soccer are rare compared to other sports. And according to an article by Today.com, they stated that there is no scientific evidence to suggest that heading in soccer is unsafe for soccer players, and it's also clear that current protective headgear will not protect the head from concussions. So in conclusions, there is still not enough scientific evidence that protective gear will protect the head from concussions, and also all sports carry some risk of injury. So if he said that soccer player will wear helmets in 10 years due to CTE, then what about other sports such as like rugby, basketball, or volley? Especially rugby, which also has similarity with NFL and also has higher injury than soccer. And also wearing helmets could also lead to young player to play more aggressively compared to when they don't wear any protections. Therefore, wearing helmets or protective gear is not necessarily always safe or protect them from injury. Okay, thank you.
You have an outline?
Oh.
All right, well, you cited the advocate structure, but there's not really a lot of structure to your argument. There's a whole bunch of things, explanations, and sometimes there's a claim being made, but it all seems like it's running together and doesn't have a distinct pattern or a structure for us to hang material on. A couple of points I think are responsive to issues that the advocate presents, and then you've got, like I said, a series of inferences that you're using to kind of counter those arguments. The challenge on the example of the 83-year-old soccer player, that's a reasonable press on this issue. I'm not sure that the advocate suggested that they died as a result of their CTE injuries, but that they suggested that this person did have some of the damage that's common that goes with CTE. And I'm not sure that death is the issue that we're talking about, but other kinds of symptoms or problems that come along with CTE. So I think that your response here is okay, but I'm not sure that it's going to get you that much. I thought that your argument about that there's a lack of evidence on what kinds of hitting people do in soccer, I thought that was, that there's a lack of evidence that links these headers to these kinds of injuries. I thought that was a little generic, but it applies particularly to this issue. There's a little bit of a challenge to the analogy that's being made down at the bottom when you're talking about the NFL and the projection over 10 years. I thought that those were reasonable issues. The issue about preventing soccer injuries, that there are other things that are more likely to occur, I thought that that made a little bit of sense. The ball size issue for kids especially seems like it mitigates whatever issue would be the worry that the parents would have that would then cause parents to call for the use of helmets. That's okay. The evidence that you had that suggested the helmets are good for other issues but not necessarily for preventing concussions, that to me was the best piece of information that you had in the argument, because if they're not good for preventing concussions, then the likelihood of them being adopted because of the fear of concussions seems to be much lower as a consequence. I like the argument that suggested that there are also alternative ways that kids can protect themselves. The ball size thing, I thought that was a reasonable point. Like I said, it just feels to me like you've got a whole bunch of explanations here, and sometimes buried in the explanation is a counterclaim, but it needs to be a little bit more structured. Everything that you said seemed relevant. Sometimes you're not specific to the evidence that the advocate's presenting, but you usually have a good explanation for the cause that you're making. All right. Thank you.